In the world of royalty, few stories are as tragic, tumultuous, and fascinating as that of Prince Philip's parents. A couple bound by royal blood, but torn apart by war, scandal, and personal demons. Behind the polished veneer of royal titles and palaces lay a marriage battered by political upheavals, exile, and deep personal suffering. Today, on Regal Chronicles, we unravel the dramatic saga of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg, two figures largely obscured by history, yet whose extraordinary lives shaped the man who would marry Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. Prince Andrew entered the world on a cold winter's day, February 2nd, 1882, in the Grand Royal Palace of Athens. His arrival was met with polite celebration, but little true excitement. As the fourth son of King George III of Greece and Queen Olga of Russia, Andrew's birth was a footnote in a royal household already brimming with future kings, princes, and princesses. In a dynasty where power was inherited by the eldest and duty assigned by birth order, Andrew was what courtiers sometimes cruelly dubbed a spare among spares. To understand Andrew's world, we must first understand the House of Glucksburg, one of Europe's most intertwined royal dynasties. His father, King George I of Greece, was born a Danish prince. Chosen by Europe's great powers to rule the fledgling Greek state after the ousting of King Otto, George was an outsider, brought in to stabilize a young, volatile nation. His mother, Queen Olga, came from the Russian imperial family, a granddaughter of Tsar Nicholas I. Together, they formed a union that was equal parts political strategy and dynastic convenience. The Greek royal family occupied an uneasy position in European aristocracy, culturally Danish, maternally Russian, and politically Greek, yet viewed by some older dynasties as upstarts. Their kingdom was young, fragile, and beset by both internal dissent and the constant threat of foreign intervention. From the marble halls of the royal palace in Athens, little Prince Andrew would have grown up amid the opulence of empire, yet under the shadow of instability. As a child, Andrew was raised alongside his numerous siblings, but his destiny was never clearly defined. Unlike his elder brothers, destined for military commands and statecraft, Andrew occupied a position of polite redundancy. His upbringing was aristocratic but emotionally cold. Like many royal households of the time, affection was scarce, and children were often raised by governesses and tutors, seeing their royal parents only at ceremonial occasions or stiff family dinners. Andrew's early education was heavily military in nature, expected for a prince with no immediate role but the looming prospect of army service. He would eventually pursue a career in the Greek military, but those early years set the tone for a life spent slightly on the periphery of both family and power. But while Andrew's story began in relative insignificance, across Europe, in the heart of the British Empire, another royal life was about to unfold, one marked by equal parts privilege and adversity. On February 25th, 1885, a baby girl was born at Windsor Castle, a setting steeped in history, the favoured residence of Queen Victoria herself. The child was named Princess Alice of Battenberg, the first daughter of Prince Louis of Battenberg, a German prince serving in the British Royal Navy, and Princess Victoria of Hesse, and by Rhine, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. From the moment of her birth, Alice's lineage was dazzling. She was a descendant of Queen Victoria, linked by blood to nearly every royal house in Europe. But, as is so often the case in royal circles, appearances concealed more than they revealed. Within her first few years, it became apparent that something was different about young Alice. She was a beautiful child, with pale blonde hair, large expressive eyes, and a precocious, intelligent manner. Yet she seemed slow to speak and struggled to respond when called. In an age with little understanding of disabilities, Her condition went undiagnosed for years. It was only later discovered that Alice was born profoundly deaf. Such a condition might have consigned another child to a life of isolation. But Alice was made of sterner stuff. Through sheer willpower, she learned to lip-read in multiple languages and became adept at speech. Her mother, Victoria, encouraged her education and fostered a sense of fierce independence in the young princess. Alice would later attribute much of her inner resilience to these early battles against her own limitations. As she grew, Alice's striking appearance made her a favoured figure at court. Courtiers praised her for her beauty, her serene, heart-shaped face, delicate features, and ethereal air earning frequent comparison to the long-lost princesses of old fairy tales. But beneath her graceful surface, Alice harboured a depth of thought and a spiritual yearning rare in a world obsessed with appearances. Even as a teenager, Alice was drawn to religion, mysticism, and charitable work. She found the court's endless rituals and empty ceremonies tiresome, preferring the company of nuns and philosophers to gossipy ladies-in-waiting. There were rumours, whispered in palace corridors, that the princess possessed a mystical streak, sometimes claiming to experience visions or prophetic dreams. Whether born from a vivid imagination or a deeper spiritual calling, these tendencies would resurface dramatically in her later life. And yet, as much as she struggled against her royal environment, Alice was still a product of her times. Her future was expected to follow a familiar path: a strategic marriage, the production of heirs, and a life of quiet support to her husband's ambitions. It is perhaps fate, or the intricate designs of Europe's dynastic matchmaking, that the lives of these two figures, Prince Andrew of Greece and Princess Alice of Battenberg, would eventually intersect. Born into distant yet entangled branches of Europe's royal family tree, they were children of a vanishing world. By the time of their births in the 1880s, the great monarchies of Europe still held sway over vast empires. Thrones seemed eternal, and royal unions were powerful tools of diplomacy. But even then, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The 20th century would not be kind to their kind. War, revolution, and the collapse of empires would soon sweep away the old order. Monarchies would fall, families would be scattered, and individuals like Andrew and Alice, born in opulence, would be forced to navigate a century of chaos and upheaval. And though neither could know it yet, their union would produce one of the most enduring figures in modern royal history. A son named Philip, whose life would mirror, in many ways, the tragedies and triumphs of his extraordinary parents. As we move forward, we'll see how these two figures, so different in temperament and upbringing, came together in a union shaped by duty, politics, and personal longing. But as with so many royal marriages, the story of Prince Andrew and Princess Alice was no fairy tale. It was a story of war, exile, madness, scandal, and ultimately, redemption. In the grand tradition of European royalty, marriages were rarely affairs of the heart. They were chess moves on a sprawling dynastic board, strategies to consolidate power, secure alliances, and maintain the delicate balance of monarchies teetering between modernity and tradition. For Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg, their union would prove no different. It was a marriage born of expectation, circumstance, and diplomatic convenience. But behind the gilded facades and formal portraits, it would become a tale of quiet heartbreak, personal struggle, and the crushing weight of royal duty. The two first met in 1902 at the coronation of King Edward VII in London, a gathering of Europe's elite that turned the streets of the British capital into a living parade of crowns and sashes. Alice, then just 17 years old, was in the full bloom of youth. Her pale beauty and gracious manners caught the eye of many suitors. But it was Andrew, a dashing young Greek prince in military uniform, who captured her attention. He was older, 20 years her senior, with dark, penetrating eyes and a confident air. By then, Andrew had established himself as a career officer in the Hellenic army, a position of both prestige and danger in a country perpetually on the brink of conflict. Handsome and charismatic, Andrew had a reputation as something of a flirt at court gatherings, yet he seemed genuinely taken by Alice's gentle demeanour and unassuming intelligence. Their courtship was swift by royal standards. Within a year, the engagement was announced. Courtiers spoke approvingly of the match. It was, after all, a politically advantageous union, a British-descended princess marrying into the Greek royal family, further entwining the already convoluted web of European aristocracy. On October 6, 1903, the couple wed in a lavish ceremony in Darmstadt, Germany, attended by Europe's most illustrious monarchs, including King Edward VII, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. The wedding, captured in stiff, formal photographs, was a spectacle of pomp and protocol. But beneath the glittering veneer, subtle tensions already simmered. For Princess Alice, marriage promised both escape and entrapment. Having grown up navigating the rigid structures of British and German courts, she perhaps hoped to find a measure of freedom in Greece, a land often romanticised as exotic and sun-drenched. Yet the reality she encountered was far less idyllic. Athens in the early 20th century was a city of sharp contrasts, ancient ruins shadowed by modern discontent. Greece was a young nation-state still finding its footing, plagued by territorial disputes and the constant threat of war. The Greek royal family, despite their titles and palaces, occupied a precarious position in a country whose loyalty to monarchy was, at best, conditional. Alice's new home was a gilded cage. The Greek court was smaller, less sophisticated than the British one, and bound by strict social codes. As a foreign princess, Alice struggled to find her footing. She was expected to learn Greek swiftly, attend endless ceremonial functions, and produce heirs. The language barrier, combined with her deafness, still largely misunderstood at the time, made court life isolating. Compounding matters was the culture clash between Alice's contemplative nature and Andrew's increasingly hedonistic lifestyle. While Alice sought solace in religion, charitable work, and her growing brood of children, Andrew immersed himself in the pleasures of military life, gambling, and court intrigue. He was known to spend long stretches away from home, posted to various military garrisons or attending to diplomatic duties. The cracks in their marriage, though discreetly hidden from public view, began to widen. Gossip occasionally trickled through the palace walls. Andrew's fondness for affairs was an open secret among Athenian high society. Alice, ever the dutiful wife, bore these indignities with stoic grace, retreating further into her spiritual devotions and charitable missions. Yet, amid the personal discord, the couple did build a family. Between 1905 and 1921, they welcomed 5 children: Princess Margarita, Princess Theodora, Princess Cecilia, Princess Sophie, and finally, in 1921, a son, Philip. The birth of Philip would mark a pivotal point, though neither Andrew nor Alice could have known it then. By the time of his arrival, the world around them was unravelling. The Balkan Wars, in which Andrew served with distinction, had destabilised the region. Greece's victories in 1912 and 1913 had come at great human cost, and Andrew's military career left him emotionally scarred and increasingly disillusioned. Meanwhile, the outbreak of World War I would shake the very foundations of Europe's monarchies. Greece, divided between pro-German and pro-British factions, became a battleground of diplomacy and treachery. The Greek royal family's German ties, through Queen Olga and other relatives, placed them under suspicion. King Constantine I, Andrew's brother, was forced to abdicate, and the monarchy teetered on the brink. During this period, Alice found herself caught in the crosshairs of politics and personal tragedy. Fiercely loyal to both her British and German relatives, she struggled to reconcile her divided loyalties. The war years were marked by personal loss. Close relatives executed in Russia, palaces reduced to rubble, and a way of life irreversibly shattered. The toll on Alice's mental health was severe. Always prone to introspection, she began to experience signs of emotional and psychological strain. She claimed to hear the voice of God, believed she had healing powers, and immersed herself in religious mysticism. While modern interpretations suggest she may have suffered from schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, at the time, such conditions were poorly understood, particularly among the aristocracy. Andrew, increasingly detached, sought distraction in affairs and military politics. His absence, both physical and emotional, left Alice to bear the burdens of motherhood, court obligations, and her own deteriorating mental health largely alone. Despite these growing fissures, the couple maintained a public facade of unity. Royal duty demanded it. Photographs from the period show a family gathered around young Philip, a boy who, despite the chaos of his upbringing, would one day marry Queen Elizabeth II and become one of the most resilient figures in modern royal history. But behind the carefully staged portraits lay a household in quiet crisis. The pressures of dynasty, war, personal betrayal, and mental illness bore down upon Andrew and Alice in ways few around them could fully comprehend. As Europe hurtled toward further turmoil in the 1920s, their marriage, like the world they inhabited, seemed destined for collapse. By the dawn of the 1920s, the political situation in Greece had reached a boiling point. The nation, exhausted by the Balkan Wars and World War I, was gripped by instability. The royal family, once hailed as national heroes, had become symbols of foreign influence and internal discord. At the heart of this turmoil was Prince Andrew. As a high-ranking officer in the Greek military, he played a direct role in the ill-fated Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922. The conflict, driven by ambitious dreams of reclaiming historic territories in Asia Minor, quickly devolved into a disaster. The Greek army was overextended, poorly supplied, and met with fierce resistance from Turkish nationalist forces under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. As the war dragged on, morale crumbled. Andrew, assigned to command the Second Army Corps, found himself overseeing a hopeless campaign in Anatolia. Troops mutinied, supplies ran dry, and defeat loomed. His military decisions, including controversial orders to retreat, would later be scrutinized, twisted into accusations of treason and cowardice by political rivals eager for scapegoats. Back in Athens, Princess Alice endured agonizing months of uncertainty. Already fragile from years of personal strain and spiritual obsession, she immersed herself in religious devotion, convinced that divine intervention might spare her husband and family. The court around her began to whisper. Tales of her eccentric behaviour circulated, how the princess would wander palace corridors clutching icons, claiming to receive heavenly visions. Then came the final blow. In September 1922, after the catastrophic defeat of the Greek army and the loss of Smyrna, a revolution erupted in Athens. The monarchy was overthrown, and King Constantine I, Andrew's brother, was forced to abdicate. Greece descended into chaos. A revolutionary tribunal swiftly convened a series of trials to punish those deemed responsible for the national humiliation. In what became known as the Trial of the Six, several top military leaders and politicians were executed by firing squad. Prince Andrew, by virtue of his command position, was arrested and charged with dereliction of duty and endangering the nation. His trial was swift and brutal. Though spared execution, likely due to pressure from Britain and other European powers, Andrew was stripped of his military titles and banished from Greece for life. His disgrace was total. The once proud prince departed Athens in shame, his military career in ruins and his family's future uncertain. But amid the political bloodletting and public hysteria, a desperate rescue mission was unfolding. The British royal family, alarmed by the prospect of Andrew's execution and the dangers facing his wife and children, intervened. It was King George V, Alice's cousin, who personally dispatched a British Royal Navy ship, HMS Calypso, to evacuate the family. In a scene more fitting for a war film than a royal memoir, Princess Alice, Prince Andrew, and their 4 daughters, along with the infant Prince Philip, were spirited out of Greece under cover of night. Legend has it that little Philip, just a toddler, was smuggled aboard in an orange crate to shield him from the dangers of the revolutionary mobs. The family arrived in Corfu, where they boarded the British vessel and sailed into exile. From there, their lives would scatter across Europe. The proud House of Glucksburg was now a family without a country. Prince Andrew, stripped of titles and honour, settled briefly in France. Bitter and disillusioned, he sought solace in gambling dens and the company of mistresses. His relationship with Alice, already strained by years of neglect and infidelity, deteriorated further. The prince showed little interest in fatherhood, leaving Alice to care for their children as best she could. For Princess Alice, exile brought both relief and tragedy. Freed from the rigid confines of the Greek court, she might have rebuilt her life. But the emotional and psychological toll of years of upheaval proved too great. By the mid-1920s, Alice's religious fervour deepened into delusions of grandeur and spiritual mania. She claimed to hear the voice of Christ and believed herself to possess healing powers. She began dressing in nun-like robes, gave away personal possessions, and declared that she had been divinely chosen for a sacred mission. Her behaviour alarmed her family. In 1930, following a series of incidents, Alice was diagnosed by European psychiatrists as suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. In a decision that would haunt the family for decades, she was forcibly institutionalized in a sanatorium in Switzerland. Prince Andrew, by then fully detached from his family, made no attempt to intervene. For young Prince Philip, this period was one of chaos and heartbreak. Separated from his mother, abandoned by his father, and shuttled between relatives in France, Germany, and Britain, he was a child without a stable home. His sisters married into German aristocracy, further complicating an already tangled family web as tensions in Europe escalated toward yet another catastrophic war. As Philip would later remark, "It's simply what happened. The family broke up. My mother was ill, my sisters married, my father went off to the south of France. I was left to it." The scandal surrounding Andrew and Alice's fall from grace lingered for years. In polite society, their names were seldom mentioned. In Greece, Andrew was remembered as a disgraced officer. In Britain, Alice was pitied. A once beautiful princess turned religious eccentric. Yet even in their exile and disgrace, the threads of fate continued to weave their patterns. For Andrew, a final chapter awaited, one marked by illness, loneliness, and an unremarkable death in 1944. For Alice, redemption would come in the most unexpected of ways, as Europe descended into war once more. And for Philip, the boy in the orange crate, destiny had only just begun to carve his path. A path that would lead him to the heart of the British monarchy, and to a marriage that would define the second half of the 20th century. By the late 1930s, as the dark clouds of World War II gathered over Europe, Princess Alice was quietly reclaiming her life. After nearly 2 years confined in a Swiss sanatorium, where she endured treatments that included ice baths, electric shock therapy, and a forced separation from her family, Alice began to show signs of recovery. Defying medical advice, she insisted on leaving the institution in 1932. She rejected the diagnosis of schizophrenia and turned her back on the psychiatrists who had labelled her a danger to herself and others. It was a decision both reckless and courageous. With no royal title, no fortune, and her marriage effectively over, Alice sought solace in her faith and a renewed sense of purpose. Returning to Greece, Alice found a nation much changed. The monarchy had been restored briefly under King George II, but political unrest and economic hardship continued to gnaw at the country. For the princess, however, the return to Athens was not about reclaiming status or titles. It was about redemption. Dressed now in austere grey habits resembling those of a nun, Alice dedicated herself to charitable work. She walked the impoverished streets of Athens, tending to the sick, feeding the hungry, and comforting the destitute. She established a nursing order, the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, though it would never achieve formal recognition. To those who encountered her, Alice was no longer a princess, but a compassionate if eccentric figure whose acts of kindness transcended her troubled past. Then came April 1941. Nazi Germany invaded Greece. The swift and brutal occupation brought horror to Athens. Food shortages, mass arrests, and public executions became daily realities. The city's Jewish population, in particular, faced systematic persecution. By 1943, the Gestapo began rounding up Greek Jews for deportation to concentration camps. It was in this crucible of terror that Alice performed what many consider her most extraordinary act. Among those at risk was the Cohen family, prominent Greek Jews and longtime acquaintances of the royal household. With the Gestapo closing in, Rachel Cohen and her 2 children sought refuge. Princess Alice, at great personal risk, took them in, hiding the family in her modest Athens apartment, directly under the noses of the Nazi occupiers. Alice's deafness, often a source of isolation throughout her life, now became an unlikely shield. When Gestapo officers came to search her residence, Alice played the role of the confused, frail old aristocrat. Speaking only in French and pretending not to understand their questions, she successfully deflected suspicion. The Cohen family remained hidden in her home until the liberation of Athens in October 1944. It was an act of defiance, both courageous and deeply personal. Alice, who had suffered the trauma of losing her family and reputation, now risked her own life to save others. In a city gripped by fear, she became a beacon of moral resolve.